Mr. President, I come to the floor today to oppose Matthew Kacsmaryk's nomination to the U.S. District Court for Northern District of Texas. Mr. Kacsmaryk is another example of an extreme choice by President Trump to jam courts with individuals who will put their political views above the law and use their positions of power to chip away at people's rights. Not only are Mr. Kacsmaryk's views hateful and out of the mainstream, but his history of attacking vulnerable communities shows me he will not be a fair and impartial judge. He has fought tooth and nail against any protections for LGBTQIA individuals and has devoted his career to stripping this community of their fundamental rights. Mr. Kacsmaryk does not believe Title VII of the Civil Rights Act includes sexual orientation and gender identity. He opposed the Supreme Court's ruling in Obergefell, which affirmed that same-sex couples have the right to marry under our Constitution, and he opposes the Equality Act. He believes this bill will, quote, weaponize Obergefell. The Equality Act builds on existing civil rights laws to expand anti-discrimination protections to ensure members of the LGBTQ community cannot be fired or evicted from their homes, providing them with the same protections afforded to those who are discriminated against based on their race, religion, age, disability, and more. He believes healthcare providers should be able to discriminate against patients based on gender identity or sex stereotyping, and he even supports discrimination against our children. Mr. Kacsmaryk not only opposes protections for transgender students, he has even argued that being transgender is, quote, delusional. And he has questioned whether states can ban conversion therapy practices, which are dangerous. They are discredited by the medical community, and they have led to depression and suicidal behavior in young people subjected to these practices. Mr. President, Mr. Kacsmaryk claims that his hateful views have to do with religious liberty, but his own words show his true colors. When Republicans and Democrats in Utah agreed on employment and housing non-discrimination protections based on gender identity and sexual orientation, Mr. Kacsmaryk opposed them even as countless religious organizations supported that bill. Was religious liberty his main point of opposition? No. Instead, he argued businesses should be able to discriminate based on a person's sexual orientation or gender identity because, in his view, this community does not deserve the same protections as other communities who are often discriminated against. Mr. Kacsmaryk has said that there is a, quote, clash of absolutes between LGBTQIA rights and those who want to discriminate in the name of religious liberty. This is not a view of someone who can be impartial and fair. And Mr. President, not only are his views on non-discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity concerning, I am also very alarmed by his record as a fervent crusader against women's reproductive rights and for the far-right position that someone else's ideology is more important than a woman's ability to make her own personal medical decisions. If his arguments had won the day in court, a woman trying to get contraceptive care could face barriers thrown up at her by her employer or even by her pharmacy, all because someone else thinks that their beliefs matter more than a woman's own personal decisions about her own health care. Mr. Kacsmaryk's extreme hostility to women's reproductive rights is also on display in his own writings outside of the court. He wrote that the court cases affirming those rights, the historic rulings that have defended women's access to birth control and their right to safe legal abortion were responsible for removing a, quote, pillar of marriage law. Under any other administration, this truly disturbing ideological track record would be alarming. Unfortunately for President Trump and Vice President Pence, it appears to be a prerequisite. The Trump-Pence administration has taken every opportunity to undermine women's health and reproductive rights, and we've seen far-right Republicans across the country joining them, from state legislators working to pass extreme, harmful abortion restrictions to Republicans here in D.C. working to jam through extreme, harmful judicial nominees like Mr. Kacsmaryk, who they hope will help uphold blatantly unconstitutional restrictions on women's rights to safe legal abortion and ultimately take away that right by overturning Roe v. Wade. But, Mr. President, I've also been inspired by the people around the country who are speaking up and taking a stand against those extreme views. And if we keep making our voices heard against this nominee and Republican efforts to undermine women's reproductive rights more broadly, we can stop these attacks and ensure every woman has the ability to make her own decisions about her body. So, Mr. President, I'm here today to urge my colleagues to join us in rejecting this nominee. Thank you, and I yield the floor.